Okay, hello everyone. This is the Atlanta FileMaker Developers Group on Wednesday, May 2nd. Let's go around the room and do the introductions of everybody who's here. All right, now we can probably see where this is. All right, let's go around and do the introductions to everyone.
I'm Junior, 360 Works.
Christy McAbench.
I'm John, United Acceptance.
All right, and my name is David Mayo from Blue Fiddle. John is our presenter today, and he's going to be giving us a presentation on using the web viewer with FileMaker and maintaining performance with the application as well.
Yes.
So, just realized I'm muted. All right, I think they can hear through you though, so that's good.
Okay,
all right.
Great.
Good thing we're close by. All right, I'm going to hit and switch this to you now. And you're all set and you're going.
All right, great. So my presentation is pretty straightforward and simple. It came from a project that we had where we were scraping search URLs out of a SharePoint search website. And I know that you can use the API to interface with SharePoint, but we haven't gotten to that level quite yet. And we needed to do looped web scraping later in a use case. So we worked through web scraping 10,000 searches in SharePoint and getting the search results so that we could put them into a script to download a bunch of documents that had been put up into SharePoint. Okay, and so this is a presentation regarding some considerations when you're web scraping large numbers of looped records. Who I am, my name is John Greene. I'm an in-house developer for United Acceptance Incorporated in Smyrna. We're a 60-person purchaser of auto retail installment contracts, so basically like auto paper, buy it at a discount, and we service it. We use FileMaker for CRM, underwriting, regulatory compliance, and some call center use case augmentation. I've been working with FileMaker for about 5 years, and last year I was able to convince my company to buy a site license. So I get to deploy as much resources as I need to for a reasonable fee. I highly recommend site licenses if you can get them. So the problem when you loop through records and open web viewers is it eats the RAM in your computer. It's like opening, if you've ever opened 75 different tabs on your web browser, all of a sudden your computer gets a lot more sluggish, a lot slower. And in FileMaker, it's the same sort of thing. It's like opening a new tab every time and not closing it. So after depending on how much RAM you have on your system, after a little while, your FileMaker program and your computer performance is retarded to the point where your script is going to fail because you're not waiting enough time for the information to render on whatever new web viewer that you're creating. And I'll show that here in a little while.
So does it keep the old site in RAM or something like that when you're switching between records, or how is that? What are you experiencing with that?
I'll show you what it does in the task manager when I use the old version, which is essentially just embedding the search criteria into the URL. And then the solution that I found online and how I implemented it into the script so that it essentially releases the cache in memory so that you don't have this sort of very fast buildup of RAM allocation. So it accrues at about 0.01 gigabytes per record, which doesn't sound like a lot until you start watching it very quickly go from reasonable to dead. So usually I could get 45 to 150 records looped through, and then my application would stop functioning. And since I was running it across 5 separate systems at the same time in different parts of my search set, I was constantly having to restart computers, although I didn't really do it for very long because it's not a very good solution. So anyway, if you want to go through a lot of records looped and scrape data off of a website over and over again, this is one way to overcome this buildup of RAM allocation. And then when you close FileMaker and restart the process, it releases all the RAMs then, because it's like closing all of the web tabs on a web browser. So I'm going to show you what happens to the memory. And what you want to look at is this right here, this memory tab on this resource task manager. So I'm going to open up this application. Okay, so
How much RAM do you have?
I've got 4 gigabytes on this particular older laptop. So just a little bit about the structure of this.
We get 8 gigs on that?
What's that?
We get 8 gigs on that machine, right?
Yeah, actually, I guess I do have 8 gigs on this machine. I was running on it a couple of 4 gigs, and they failed a lot faster. And you'll see I still have the results in here, but for the purposes of this presentation, it's just going to loop through wherever I start this script. So I'm going to show you what the script does, because we're going to look at the differences later. We're basically just setting a variable for the account number. That's our search criteria. And then we're setting a field in a different table, which I'm using to drive my search. And this is immaterial, but I didn't want to mess with it too much here. But I'm opening a new window to do the web, and then I'm the web viewer. And then all these fields are on the web viewer, and they're selecting the what do you call it? The get layout object attribute, comma content. So that's the function that gets the attributes of a layout object, in this case a web viewer, and when you use the parameter content, it gets the HTML. And then I'm using that in a custom calculated field in order to get each sequential search result on the page. By the way, in CRM Dynamics, the default is 10, and you have to reset it to 50 or 250 if you want more than that. So I think 50 is the max you can do. But basically, the process of getting the search is not as important as looking what happens to the resources when you. I'm going to go over here to the scrape layout, and you can see that I'm just using the URL for the search pages and embedding the account number into the middle of that URL. And that's what's producing the result. And it should already be logged in, and my password should, yep. Okay, so this should work. No problem. And whoa. Whoa. That also may. What did I just do?
You're fine. You're good.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start this, and I'm hoping that it doesn't activate the Google Chrome that I have open. But so right now we're at 2.54 gigabytes, just about, and I'm going to start the loop. And so it's putting the search results in, then getting the next one. And as you can see, we've gone from 5.4 to 2.6 right away. But then as we loop through more and more, you'll see the RAM memory allocation build to more and more. And you can imagine that after a couple of hundred of these, if you're doing this on a 4 gigabyte machine, you run out of RAM really quick.
So you've got the web viewer actually in a new window, and that window with the web viewer is being closed, but FileMaker's still holding on to it.
Yes, because initially my idea was that if I closed the window that the web viewer was in, it would release the RAM allocation. That was not the case. That was my first thought. If I just get rid of the web viewer window, then I shouldn't have the RAM allocation any longer. But in actuality, you actually have to essentially reset the web viewer in order for it to release the RAM allocation. So very quickly, we're from 2.64 to 2.94, and we've only gone through maybe what, 5 or 10 records. You can see where, and I don't know if this is as a result of us broadcasting or not, but it's building even faster than I thought it would. But so if you walk away from this process, when you walk back to it, you're going to find that your process is stopped, because you can put as many pauses of 3 seconds or 5 seconds as you want, but if your stuff doesn't render, then the HTML is not going to be there for it to be parsed into the receptacle fields that I have. And then I clean them up and I put them over into my data set. So I'm basically just collecting data off of a sequential set of web pages. And now I'm at 3.1 or 3.9. So I'm going to stop this process because you can see how this would be detrimental very shortly. Or do you have any questions so far about the example of how this is not a tenable solution because it quickly eats up the RAM of the system?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, this would be a good use case for using an API rather than...
Of course, especially with something as advanced, with such an advanced API as SharePoint. But there are other use cases where you would want to. In fact, I have part of I can show an application later where I'm building out a CRM, and we have 135,000 company records, but we have many duplicates, but they have different names, they have different ways of putting in the address, and so it's hard for me to identify the duplicates necessarily. So one of my ideas is to web scrape the latitudes and longitudes of all of the addresses using Google Maps and scrape the lat lon into a field, and then use the lat lons as a duplicate data set, because I'm hoping that Google's fuzzy logic will be able to identify the same location better than I can determine.
Actually, interesting side note on that. Google just released new pricing for their Maps API today, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of having this like $10,000 per year base price to use the stuff commercially, they're starting with it's a pay-as-you-go kind of plan for data usage, and it starts with essentially $200 of credit per month against their services. It's really inexpensive now for pricing. So that will also be
Once again, API.
Yeah.
Okay, well.
but it is really interesting seeing the web viewer load. I mean, there could be lots of reasons why someone would want to load a web viewer. Things you can't do through an API for some reason. I know
Right.
people have done it for like
Well, like, okay, so I do
things.
financial stock market type analysis too, and there's a site called FinViz that you can get a lot of stock market data. If you sign up for their $15 a month, whatever, you can get this all downloaded into Excel. Or if you know what you're doing with web scraping, you can basically just loop through the data that you want.
Scraping issue. It seems like it's just the
it's just
action of rendering a web page.
Exactly.
Is using
precisely. But if you're
tons of reasons to show web viewer content in FileMaker, and it seems like this is just a problem that you're noticing with web viewers. If you open and close a whole bunch of them,
right,
it's using more and more RAM.
Absolutely. So that's the old way of doing it. And if you close FileMaker, you'll notice that we've gone from 310 back down to 225 in RAM allocation. Now I'm going to come over here to my new sales support app, which is essentially the same application.
That drop off right there in your little chart.
Exactly. And that's important to show, because that's how you would get all of this RAM deallocated, is to actually, you'd have to close FileMaker, reopen your application, and restart the process wherever it broke. But you'd have to go back and do some research as to where it broke, when you started getting a negative result in your script. And so you have to then, you actually have to go to the search result and say, did I get the right, here's where I think it broke. Did I start getting bad data where? Right? So we're back at 434, and I'm gonna go in here and show you where we've changed this script a little bit. So on this particular one, we're creating this variable f search, and it's the URL with the embedded account number into a variable, as opposed to setting the web viewer URL. When we open up the web viewer, we're creating a variable, and then we're just doing a case statement. So we're going to set a URL indicator to 1, so that when we open up the new window, it's going to, and I'll show you the how I've got the web address. So this is just a simple case statement that if the URL indicator is 0, then evaluate the variable f nada, which is nothing. And if it's not 0, of course, then f search, which is this commented URL that I have underneath it. So I can either have the web address of this web viewer evaluate to nothing, or the variable that I set when I started my loop. And then after all of these fields are selected, and that's just to render I'm basically rendering all the data into these fields, and then I'm setting variables that I'm going to bring back to my initial layout. But right here is the key. So I'm going to set the indicator to 0 after I've set all my variables, and then I'm going to set the web viewer, which it's named SP search, and the action is reset. So it says then 0, and the web viewer is now set on no URL. And once you hit reset, then it releases the RAM allocation. And then I also found that you have to actually pause the script for a couple of seconds. Otherwise, it doesn't release it. So that was trial and error. You actually kind of have to wait for just a second for it to release.
So when you're resetting it, you're setting it to or setting the URL to blank.
Yes.
To nothing.
By setting that URL indicator to 0,
Mhm.
the case statement evaluates to blank as opposed to the URL that I created when I initiated the script.
And so by setting that calculation to be blank, FileMaker is releasing.
And then resetting that particular web viewer to whatever it's currently defined as, it releases the RAM allocation.
So just closing it was not enough.
Closing it was not enough.
You had to set it to blank first.
And evaluate it,
Mm-hmm.
at blank.
Yeah.
And then the RAM is released. Or actually, you'll see that instead of accruing at 0.01 gigabytes per, it's accruing at like 0.005 gigabytes per record.
So there's still an issue of making web viewers and destroying web viewers, and it seems like FileMaker's holding on to some of that RAM.
It is,
but it's a lot less.
But it's like an order of magnitude or an order and a half of magnitude less than by not using this set web viewer action reset. It's basically just saying, okay, the URL has changed. Now I want you to reevaluate it. So that, but I'm having you reevaluate it on nothing.
Yeah.
And so it says, oh, well, this isn't really, we don't need, I guess it's saying we don't need the RAM for this, not a web viewer anymore. It's not viewing anything on the web. So, but that was from my research what the suggestion was to overcome this issue, and it functioned as it was described in the research that I had done. So now I'll demonstrate that. Okay, so we're at 249. And the action looks substantially the same, but
I can see the RAM going back down again.
yeah, and it won't build nearly as quickly. It will build, but it won't build nearly as quickly as it did in the previous example.
So yeah, there you go. So every time it opens up the page, you can see it going from 2.58 whatever up to
6.2, but then back down to about 2.54, and so it's building much slower, and it allowed me
going up and staying up.
Right, as opposed to going up and staying up. So this allowed me to do, say 1,000 or 1,500 records at a time on my lower RAM machines, close to 2,000 records on my higher RAM machines, and that was sufficient for my use case. That was enough for me to be able to manage several machines doing this scrape. Caveat, of course, being, yes, the API would have been a lot more efficient. And I have to do that anyway because of a use case that I have in another application. But I actually...
I mean, the scraping isn't the issue here, I don't think. It seems like the issue is...
No, the scraping is not the issue. The scraping it's nothing. But the web viewer just... it maintains that RAM allocation, and this process of resetting the URL and then reevaluating the web viewer releases that RAM so that the RAM allocation does not build to a place where the system becomes unstable.
Have you done some testing with this with some different configurations? So for example, having a web viewer and then changing layouts and then back again doing a different URL versus opening and closing windows? Does that reuse the same bit of RAM?
Well, I actually started with the web viewer on the same page, and then I went to the separate layout that opens and closes on a new window as a way of trying to overcome this initially. And then when that didn't work, I just kept that structure. But from my reading, and I haven't tested this, from my reading, this approach of releasing the RAM is not dependent upon the window opening and closing. You can do it with, I could have the web viewer embedded on this first layout and accomplish the same thing.
Well, what I'm asking about is if instead of doing like the reset and release thing, if you went just from one URL to the next, would you be increasing the amount of RAM you're using, or would that kind of use the same?
Yeah, if you use one web viewer and just keep feeding it URLs one after the other, it's the same effect.
So the RAM usage keeps going up.
Yes, it does. Yeah, it does. So at about this time, the last time, we had over 3.10 gigabytes of RAM allocated, and now we're still at around the 2.6. Which I think we started around 2.58 or something like that. So it's already got a spread of about a half a gigabyte.
Yeah.
And on a 4 gigabyte machine, if you're running these in multiple machines at the same time, you know, that's you there's just no way for you to manage that unless you're sitting there in front of all 5 machines and closing it after 150 records and then resetting the RAM allocation and then restarting your process. And then it's hardly not even worth having a script. You know, you're almost better off just getting people and saying, okay, press this button, then press this button, and then close it, and then, you know, so.
Now, this process seems a little longer than the other process. So what kind of time difference are you seeing?
I think I inserted a couple extra seconds in this process just to make sure that, because stability was more, for my particular use case, stability was more important to me than speed. Because if I needed more speed, I just spun up a new, because I have a site license, I just spun up a new machine with FileMaker on it, and you know, I was doing this off of a server, a hosted. Right now, these are just on my desktop, but I hosted this on a server, and it worked just fine, hosted just as well as it did, of course, because there's really no difference. But
have you tried this on any other operating systems? So this is running on Windows 7.
This is running on Windows 7. I have not tried this on any other OS.
Either Windows 10 or Mac OS.
I might have done it on 10 because I was running, because I can VPN in. I think I did it on 10 because I did it from home and I VPN'd in to my server, well, to my network, and then access the server over the VPN. And it essentially did the same thing on 10. But I don't think it's, I didn't try this on Apple because I have an Apple computer, but I try not to get it too mixed up with the stuff I'm doing at work, so. But anyway, that's the end of my presentation.
Well, great. Cool. That's very interesting. Excellent.
And then
I would definitely say send this to FileMaker as a bug report. Because you know, it seems like it's just web viewers using web viewers, at least on Windows for sure, we can see it. It seems like it's just eating up RAM.
right.
And whatever you're using web viewers for is going to be a problem on Windows, at the very least. So yeah, definitely something to bug report.
Yep. So like, I mean, I think this is in the forums. I think I found this solution in the forums, so they're aware of it if they look. But you know,
I would definitely send a recording. We'll have a recording of this as well.
sure.
So you know, you can say, "Hey, here's my solution. You might do some."
I'm sure there's an even more efficient solution.
And then,
I only got it to the point where I needed to get it to in order to accomplish scraping all of it, because we were supporting, because we're doing a debt sale of non-performing accounts, and the debt buyer wanted all of the supporting documentation for all of the loans or contracts that we had purchased, that they were buying for a greater discount than we purchased them for. And we have all of that information in SharePoint, but SharePoint, it's like anything it's easy to get in. It's harder to get it all out in a automated, especially when it's hosted in the cloud like it is. And there are solutions, like there are tools that you can purchase, or plugins or applications that go in and use the API to easily get in and out different search criteria and extract the data. At first, I tried to use the insert from URL curl with the curl options, but after trying that for a while, we just gave up and used a PowerShell script. But in the next quarter, I'll be definitely trying to get the API working with my FileMaker solution, because I like to be able to integrate in that SharePoint document control stuff with my underwriting application.
Well, that's very good. That's some great information.
How frequently do you do this?
How frequently do I do
the scraping?
Is
that a nightly
I never do it. This is a one-off application built for a very specific use case. They came to us and said, hey, we have 10,000 accounts that we want to sell, and we need to get all the documents related to them out of SharePoint. How are we going to do that? And I'm like, you mean without using a bunch of people to just do the search? I'm like, well, we can write a script and FileMaker and scrape the website, the web result, and try to extract the URLs. Because if you look at the HTML at the bottom, they've got a search algorithm that renders this number. It's a base 28 point and then 13 decimals. And the higher it is, the more likely it's going to apply to the search criteria. Now, the difficulty that we had is our naming conventions have changed for our documents over the course of several years. So once you get the results, you actually have to then scrub the search results to, determine the applicability of is this document relevant to the account or not? But that was a secondary, consideration. The first thing I needed to do was to get all of the URLs, because I can't insert from URL and I can't pull something down in a PowerShell script without having the actual URL of the document. Fortunately, that's on the website because it's hyperlinked. The search result has a hyperlink to that URL. And if you go in there and you start playing, the game of, I don't know, search for this unique string. Okay, now count 3 backslashes forward from that string, and that'll give me, that'll now give me the next 1,500 characters, and basically just dial it in until you're getting each individual URL. And then I did a little cleaning up with the calculated fields, and then I was able to bring that back over into my results area. But that was as much time as I wanted to spend on it, because like I said, it was a one-off. It was just saying, okay, how can we save several hundred man hours by using the system that we have in-house?
It accomplished the goal.
And it accomplished the goal, exactly.
Wow.
I would have loved to spend more time and make it even cooler, but I didn't need to be cool at that point, because I have 2 minivans and I don't need, I can only handle so much cool. But that's it.
Great. Thanks.
Whoops. I'm in the matrix. So what do I do here? Just stop presenting?
Yeah, you can click on the window. You can close the window. It'll exit out.
Great, let's do that.
All right, so that's it. And
Do you have any remote attendees?
we have a couple of remote attendees, so talk to the group here. So what are we going to talk about next time? Very cool. Any remote people, if you have suggestions as well, we're looking at chat. So.
become qualified quite yet soon.
Mhm.
Trust me. If I can do one, you can do one.
You're gonna want to learn about MirSync customization scripts.
Yes, that's a great topic.
Let's wait on that.
That's the
I'm
next,
trying to get
that's what I'm gonna use to convince them to buy one of the plugins from 360 Works, except that why would I buy one plugin when I can get the entire portfolio for only $2,000 and then a $600, I think it is, a year maintenance fee?
Nice plug.
Hey, I know it well. I've got my pitch. I'm honing my pitch.
Hey, you guys are hosting the thing. You gotta get some plugs in there, right? You're hosting the meeting.
No, I mean, we're not. So,
Tom says
Some-
FileMaker 17. Tom, we have no idea what you're talking about. Who knows if there will ever be a FileMaker 17?
I mean, I would love to do augment applications with a lot of the plugin capability. But for right now, just make do with just the native capability,
Right.
and then whatever free plugins I can get. I don't know, like base elements or something. Apparently, they're good at doing something with the APIs or something.
What did people, if you don't mind me getting off topic for sure, what did people do before MirSync? Like, is there any kind of native attempt to?
There's another sync solution that I've used called Sync Server Pro
Okay.
from Linear Blue.
Okay.
That does server-to-server syncing, either like FileMaker or MySQL databases and things like that.
Okay.
There's some other features with it too, like auditing. Yeah, it goes.
So FileMaker has a main attempt too. Okay. That's kind of.
I see why it's kind of a weird
Yeah.
area for them to get into.
Yeah. A lot of work.
Yeah.
Was that the most used plugin here, MirSync?
It's probably it's the most expensive one. It's not technically plugin, it's just software. You know, it's just one of the Tomcat and server communicates between devices and FileMaker servers or FileMaker servers, FileMaker servers. Also works with SQL and other ODBC platforms. So I don't think it's like the highest for just in terms of like amount of sales. But if you factor in the fact that it costs $500 more than our average plugin, it's our best seller. Yeah.
Would it be super quick there?
Super containers, probably up there. That's our IceMaker. Super container. Oh, our IceMaker.
Oh,
I don't know what's going on. Still looking into it.
All right, well, we'll look at some, I'll end the stream here. We'll look at some new topics. We'll talk about that. If FileMaker follows its pattern of the past few years and releases a new product in May, June might be a little earlier to talk about any potential new features that might come from a potential new product.
Potentially.
So maybe the one after that might be a good time to get everyone familiar with things. And,
Could we have a line with Molly or any of the FileMaker people to come in and present? Last time we did, I think it was at the clubhouse, right?
I did see a
Um,
webinar about the new feature.
Yeah, that might be. I'll look into that and see if we can get someone from FileMaker to.
Or something.
It's Molly.
Molly Connolly. Yeah, she.
Oh, that Molly.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I haven't spoken to her in a long time. Actually, I see her at DevCon, but
Yeah.
Local rep is Darren, right?
he's not. He's changed roles. I think he's doing something else.
I think the last presentation for Clubhouse was Andy and
Mhm.
Gates and Darren.
Yeah.
And Mom might have been.
I don't think she's. Anyway, I'm gonna end our stream here. Did I do that already? I don't think so.
Hi, everybody.
All right, bye.
Hi, Erica.